The Odd Couple first appeared as a Broadway play in 1965. It was about two divorced men who had become roommates with totally opposite personalities. One was the neat, stuffy, uptight Felix Unger. The other was the messy, friendly, outgoing Oscar Madison. Play was eventually turned into a couple of movies, a Saturday morning cartoon, and several television series. The last one starred Matthew Perry and Thomas Lennon and was viewed in 2015, 2016, 50 years after the play had first debuted. We probably all know or have seen couples that look like an odd match. How many of you knew that Cher and Tom Cruise had a romantic relationship in the mid-1980s when she was 40-ish and he was in his lower 20s? Or that John Tesh left Oprah Winfrey in the middle of the night from an apartment they shared together in the mid-1970s. Speaking of an odd couple, Marjorie McCool is 91 years old and has been in a 5-year relationship with a man 60 years younger than herself. I mean, in all fairness, she was a spry 86 when they began that relationship, but... and 5'8" Merve Debo. Now, 5 feet 8 inches is pretty tall for women, isn't it? I mean, but standing next to her husband, Sultan Kozan, she looks tiny because he's the world's tallest individual at 8'3". There are many in our world who think that science and the Bible not only make an odd couple, but that they are totally incompatible. Bill Maher is a television host who's been known for being critical of Christianity. He once said, and I'm quoting here, "I don't hate America, I love America. I'm just embarrassed that it has been taken over by evangelicals, by people who do not believe in science and rationality. The future does not belong to religion." According to him, people who take the Bible literally are idiots. Interesting, because last time I looked, the United States was being overrun by politically correct atheists like Bill Maher, and we're reaping the consequences of our insanity and immorality. Richard Dawkins is another atheist who does not see science and religion as being a compatible couple, but rather as mortal enemies locked in a battle. That he sees science must ultimately win. The Russian dictionary once defined the Bible as, quote, "a collection of fantastic legends without scientific support." Charles Swindoll, in response to that, wrote, and I quote, "The power, influence, and philosophies of Russia have wilted and crumbled with time, but the Bible has never waned in its power or influence because it is not of man, it is of God." It is a myth that science and the Bible or science and God cannot coexist, cannot share a close relationship together. You see, God created science. And because he did, rationally thinking people, which I think includes Christians, believe that science and the Bible make a very happy couple together. 1 Peter 3, same text we used last week because we're gearing up here for next week's topics that Carl Kirby is going to share with us. Chapter 3, verses 15 and 16. "You must worship Christ as Lord of your life. And if someone asks about your Christian hope, always be ready to explain it. But do this in a gentle and respectful way. Keep your conscience clear. Then, if people speak against you, they will be ashamed when they see what a good life you live because you belong to Christ. If you take out the outline there from inside of your bulletin, I liked this chair so much last week, I'm going to use it again this week, by golly. So if I fall asleep during the message, somebody wake me up here. All right, first thing we're going to look at is the witness of Christian scientists. While many would have us to believe that scientists today are too intelligent to believe in God, the Pew Research Center conducted a survey in which they found that 51% of scientists acknowledge some form of deity, some form of a higher power, and 33% of scientists specifically identify that higher power to be the God of the Bible. Truth is, this conflict that we're talking about here is not between science and the Bible. It is a battle between two polar opposite world views. One begins with God, and the other worldview totally eliminates God. It wasn't until the 1800s that a conflict began to emerge between science and Christianity. Charles Darwin's publication of his controversial book on the origin of species in 1859 became the fuel atheists seized upon to eliminate the existence of God. Now, what many people do not know, I didn't know until this week, was that Charles Darwin once said, and I'm quoting here, "I have never denied the existence of God. It is impossible to understand our immense universe as simply being the result of chance." Darwin assumed his findings would be compatible with faith. It was Darwin's friend, an atheist named Thomas Huxley, who promoted Darwin's writings as proof there is no God. And now you know the rest of the story. But history is filled with Christian scientists who credit their discoveries to God, who view their work as merely uncovering what God has already known. The word science comes from a Latin word meaning knowledge. But where does knowledge come from that makes up science? Well, we read in Proverbs that fear of the Lord is the beginning, is the foundation of true knowledge. Knowledge begins with the words of Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1. In the beginning, God. True knowledge begins with the premise of God. And so as a scientist, how would I know that my findings, my conclusions were true? Sir Francis Bacon was an English politician who developed a scientific method in the year 1620 for determining the truthfulness of scientific suppositions. His method has been occasionally tweaked, occasionally revised, but it has been used ever since. Bacon was a man of faith. While Leonardo da Vinci is best known for his paintings, including the Mona Lisa, The Last Supper, amongst many others, he had a brilliantly creative mind, inventive mind, and is credited with significant contributions to the field of hydraulics. He was a man of faith. Isaac Newton was an English mathematician, astronomer, theologian, author, physicist, who is viewed by many to be one of the greatest scientists of all time. Newton is credited for his contributions to the fields of optics and calculus, for inventing the telescope, identifying the law of gravity. Sir Isaac Newton was a man of faith. He is quoted as saying, "No sciences are better affirmed than the religion of the Bible." He said, "I find more sure marks of authenticity in the Bible than in any other history." What we know, he said, is a drop. What we do not know is a vast ocean. The arrangement and harmony of the universe could have only come from the plan of an omniscient and omnipotent being. Albert Einstein is considered to be one of the greatest of all human minds, and he maintained it was impossible to conceive of a universe that wasn't created. He is quoted as saying, "Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind." I mean, we could go on. Many Christian scientists throughout the centuries who have made discoveries or inventions. Louis Pasteur championed preventative medicine through proper vaccination, immunization, pasteurization. Joseph Lister, who advocated for sterilizing of surgical equipment, cleaning wounds during surgery. And while Listerine was introduced in the year 1879 as a surgical antiseptic, we know it today as a mouthwash. Even though his ideas were rejected for years, leaving him with little money for even food, Samuel B. Morse never stopped believing that God's guiding hand was a part of his life. And ultimately, he was credited with inventing the telegraph and the language needed to use the telegraph Morse code. I mean, we could go on and on. These and many other scientists who believed in the inspiration and the authority of the Bible. Their commitment to God did not prevent them from being intelligent, but rather inspired them to uncover intelligence that had previously been known only to God. When evolutionists arrogantly claim that Bible-believing creation scientists aren't really scientists at all, they not only insult Christian scientists, but they also insult the Creator himself. For it is God who tells us the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. The God of Isaac Newton, Joseph Lister, Louis Pasteur, Albert Einstein, Samuel B. Morse, and many others is the same God who is to be forever praised. I want to secondly look at the testimony found in nature. If biological evolution has been going on for billions of years, one would logically expect to find hundreds, if not thousands, of fossil examples showing reptiles evolving into birds and apes evolving into humans, etc., etc., etc. And yet, despite the very best efforts of evolutionary scientists to find any such example, not one has ever been observed. And these same people want us to also believe that somehow, at some point in history, enough gases came together in the universe to cause an explosion, and poof, the first living cell came into existence from nothing. We all choose to believe in something, don't we? We all have to ultimately put our faith into something or someone that we can't 100% prove. Louis Pasteur's findings clearly concluded, though, that life always comes from life. An adult human body is made up of about 75 trillion cells. I know. Any one of those is a complex cell beyond human comprehension. Dr. Walter Bradley of Texas A&M states, each cell of the 75 trillion in the human body contains more information than all 30 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Every one of our 75 trillion cells. What is the likelihood the human body came into existence by chance from non-living matter? Dr. Bradley observes that the human body alone, all by itself, is the unmistakable sign of an intelligent designer. Antony Flew was an English philosopher, world-renowned atheist. When Flew was in his 80s, he participated in a dialogue, a discussion, a debate, if you will, with his friend and his philosophical adversary, Gary Habermas, on the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Shortly after that dialogue, Flew called Habermas and said that philosophical and scientific considerations were causing him to rethink his atheistic views. By the year 2007, Flew said he now agreed with Albert Einstein that the physical universe is so complex it can only be explained in terms of an intelligent source. And in his book entitled "There Is a God," Antony Flew asked the question, how can a universe of mindless matter produce beings with self-replication capabilities and coded chemistry? He also concluded that nature had no logical explanation for the beginning of life. Neither did nature have any logical theory for the complex DNA within all living organisms, including human beings. Francis Collins is the director of the Human Genome Project. He is a scientist and a believer who sees no conflict between the information he has learned in the past, the information he is presently learning, and his faith. He was, one time, an atheist. As a medical student, searching for the answers to life that his atheism could not provide him, Dr. Collins eventually found Jesus Christ. In June of 2000, when a working draft of the Human Genome Project was first released, Dr. Francis Collins said, and I'm quoting, "It is humbling for me and awe-inspiring to realize we have the first glimpse of our own human DNA instruction book, previously known only to God." Did you know the oxygen level in the Earth's atmosphere is 21%? I didn't know it either before this week, in all honesty. Scientists tell us that if the oxygen levels in our atmosphere were 25% instead of 21%, fires would spontaneously break out all over the planet. On the other hand, if the oxygen levels in our atmosphere were only 15% instead of 21%, humans would die of suffocation. Wow, lucky for us, evolution got those oxygen levels just right. Did you know the gravitational pull of the sun on the earth, as well as the gravitational pull of the earth on the moon, is exactly what it needs to be to keep our planet in a position and at a distance to support life? Lucky evolution got that right. An atheist friend visited Sir Isaac Newton and saw there in Newton's office a scale model of our solar system that Newton had made. And this atheist friend, is marveling at how intricate and beautiful this model was. And he asked Sir Isaac Newton who made it. And he nonchalantly replied, "Well, nobody did. It just made itself." The friend became angry, asked the same question, got the same answer, and Newton asked, "If you cannot believe that something as simple as this model cannot make itself, how can you believe the heavens made themselves?" Even though evolution is taught in our public schools as fact, it is still an unproven theory. And even though the world continues to accuse Christians of having a blind faith, it is secularists who have no facts upon which to base their theories. Christianity is not an irrational worldview. It is the only worldview that is rational. And thirdly, I want to look at scientific proof in the Bible itself. There are a lot of facts, a lot of references, a lot of descriptions of things in Scripture that man didn't discover until centuries after they had already been recorded in the Bible, and I want to look at just a few. We read in Leviticus chapter 14 and verse 11 that the life of the body is in its blood. Leviticus was written prior to 1400 BC. We know today that the blood carries water and nourishment to every cell in the body and removes waste materials from those same cells. We know today that blood maintains the body's temperature and that blood carries oxygen from the lungs throughout the whole body. In 1616, William Harvey concluded that blood circulation is the key factor in physical life. Hello? Scripture said that 3,000 years before. The life of the body is in its blood. The Bible describes the shape of the earth in Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 20. God sits above the circle of the earth. The people below seem like grasshoppers to him. Now that Hebrew word translated circle indicates something rounded, something spherical. Isaiah was written at least 300 years before Aristotle was the first one to suggest the earth might be a sphere. And 1900 years before Galileo was convicted of heresy by the Catholic Church in 1615 for suggesting the earth was round instead of flat, and suggesting the earth revolved around the sun instead of the universe revolving around the earth. God commanded circumcision to be done on the 8th day after a baby boy is born. Why not sooner? We do it sooner today. Doctors now know that it is on the 8th day after birth that a baby boy produces the most vitamin K. What does vitamin K do? It helps the body form blood clots. Without that vitamin present, a baby boy would bleed to death from circumcision. So how do we do circumcision on a boy before he leaves the hospital today? We have to artificially give him doses of vitamin K. You think Abraham knew about that when he proposed that all Jewish males be circumcised on the 8th day after birth? I don't think he did. But God did. Was Moses a medical doctor? Not that I'm aware of. And yet we find in Exodus, Leviticus, Moses had a long list of foods which the Jewish people could eat and foods they were to avoid. How would he have known about that? How would he have known which foods are kosher and which foods are not? He wouldn't have. But God did. In Genesis 6, verse 15, God gave Noah very specific measurements for building the ark. The ark was to be 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. This is a very intelligent congregation that I'm blessed to preach to, and so you know with me Those measurements work out to a ratio of 30 to 5 to 3. When the SS Great Britain was launched in 1843, it was called, quote, the greatest experiment since the creation. Did you know the ratio of its dimensions were exactly the same as that of Noah's Ark? 30 to 5 to 3. That was the same ratio used to build ships during World War II. 30 to 5 to 3. Why? Because that is the perfect ratio for building a large seaworthy vessel. Did Noah know those were the perfect dimensions for a large seagoing vessel? Hello, Noah lived in the desert. He wouldn't have had a clue. But God did. Dr. Stephen Meyer holds a doctorate in science philosophy from Cambridge University. He said, and I'm quoting, I often think of the smile that must be on the lips of God as all sorts of evidence for the reliability of the Bible, for the reliability of His creation of the universe, and the reliability of His creation of life continually be uncovered in the last few years. GQ magazine announced last week, I'm not a subscriber, I just heard about this in the news, that the Bible is one of the most overrated books of all time, and people shouldn't read it. Their editors, I thought maybe it was an article written by one person, but it actually was their editors all agreed with this quote, those who have read the Bible know there are some good parts, but overall it is certainly not the finest thing that man has ever produced. It is repetitive, self-contradictory, and foolish. Try telling that to a young man who was sitting in a prison at the age of 19 in a foreign country, having been sentenced to 5 years of prison time for gang and drug-related charges. Fortunately, someone who didn't share GQ's conclusion visited that young man in his cell and gave him an English Bible. Not having anything else to do, he read it for the first time. And as he did, hope came alive. As he read it, he realized some of the words in the Bible were written by fellow prisoners. And in the pages of the Bible, he found grace, kindness, and forgiveness, realizing that maybe, just maybe, if he had read these words earlier in his life, he wouldn't be in the mess he was in. The moral fabric of this nation was built upon and came from the truths of the Bible. We are a uniquely different people from anybody else in the rest of the world because we were founded upon the truths of the Bible. Because it is a divinely inspired book, the Bible speaks to every aspect of human experience with words of clarity and wisdom and hope. The Bible has been read and studied and translated and followed more than any other book in all of human history, and it will take more than GQ to change the minds of many millions who have found the Bible to be the foundation of their lives. The writers at GQ may have been guiding men's fashion for 87 years, but the Bible has been guiding lives for more than 1,700 years. The young man whose first contact with the Bible was while sitting in a prison of a foreign country, Roy Peterson, who is today the president and CEO of the American Bible Society, author of the book, Set Free, Unstoppable Hope for a World That is Waiting. It is amazing to me that GQ and Richard Dawkins and many others waste their time trying to disprove something they say doesn't exist. And they tell us we have a blind faith. I hope you'll be here for as many of next weekend's messages as possible as we prepare ourselves to give the reason for the hope that we believe in.